You know, World War II, it was a conflict so massive, so all-consuming, that its scale is almost impossible to wrap your head around. But buried under all those staggering statistics are these incredible human stories of defiance, of shocking cruelty, and of just unbelievable survival. So today, we're going to dig into some of the stories that really bring this global catastrophe into focus.
And let's start with this. This quote from Albert Einstein just hits you, right? He wasn't just being dramatic. He was giving a serious, chilling warning that another world war with the kinds of weapons we had could be so destructive it would literally send humanity back to the Stone Age. It's such a powerful way to frame what was truly at stake. And trust me, that was no exaggeration. For 6 brutal, long years, the world was caught in the single deadliest conflict in all of human history. The estimated death toll? Around 70 million people. It's a number so huge, it's almost meaningless. You can't even picture it. And that number includes soldiers and, as we're about to see, a truly heartbreaking number of ordinary civilians.
So, Section 1, a war beyond imagination. How does something like this even happen? How does one single event spiral out of control and pull nearly the entire planet into a war? Well, it all started with one aggressive move, fueled by a terrifying ambition for absolute power.
And here it is. This is the official starting pistol. September 1st, 1939. Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany invades Poland. His goal was to expand German territory, what he called living space, and to just dominate Europe. Right after that, Great Britain and France declared war on Germany, and just like that, the first dominoes of a world war started to topple.
Moving on to Section 2, an ideology of hate. But you have to understand, this wasn't just a war over land. Not at all. At its very core, this was a war of ideas. It was a brutal clash between two totally different visions for where humanity was headed, and it forced countries all over the world to pick a side.
And here are those sides, the main players in this global drama. On one side, you had the Allied powers. This was a massive alliance that eventually brought together giants like Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. And on the other, the Axis powers, led by the trio of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now, of course, not everybody jumped in. Some countries, like Spain and Switzerland, actually managed to stay neutral through the whole thing.
And inside this massive global war, one of the absolute darkest chapters in human history was taking place. Hitler's plan, chillingly called the final solution, is what we now know as the Holocaust. It was a systematic, factory-like genocide. The Nazis murdered 6 million Jewish people, but they also targeted millions of others they considered unfit. That included Romani people, homosexuals, and people with disabilities.
And this became the symbol of all that hatred. For pretty much anyone in the Western world, you see the swastika, and you immediately think of Nazism, of brutality, and the horrors of the Holocaust. It has become a powerful, undeniable emblem of pure evil.
But here's the absolute tragic irony of it all. The word swastika actually comes from the ancient Sanskrit language, and for thousands of years in cultures like Hinduism and Buddhism, it was a sacred symbol. It meant well-being, good fortune, auspiciousness. The Nazis literally hijacked this ancient symbol of peace and twisted it, tainting it forever and turning it into a global symbol of hate.
Okay, Section 3, unbelievable stories from a world at war. Now let's zoom in from the big picture, because this war is just filled with these incredible personal stories. We're going to look at a few wild examples of individual choices, and frankly, some bizarre plans that actually played out on the world stage. Okay, so get this. You've got this German general, Dietrich von Choltitz. It's 1944. The Allies are closing in on Paris, and Hitler gives him a direct order: burn the city to the ground. He wants the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, all of it turned to rubble. But the general basically decided Hitler had lost his mind, and he flat out refused the order. He surrendered the city peacefully, and he's now known as the Savior of Paris.
And speaking of the Eiffel Tower, you're going to love this story of petty defiance. Earlier in the war, when Hitler himself visited occupied Paris, the French resistance knew they couldn't stop him, but they could really annoy him. So they cut the elevator cables. This meant that if the Führer wanted that triumphant photo op at the top, he was going to have to climb over 1,600 stairs to get there. He decided against it.
And this sheer arrogance is just mind-blowing. At the same time Germany was relentlessly bombing British cities into dust, Hitler gave a specific order to his Air Force: do not touch the seaside resort town of Blackpool. And why? Because he had already picked it out as his personal vacation spot for after he won the war. Unbelievable.
And just when you think it can't get any weirder, listen to this. Adolf Hitler had a nephew, William Patrick Hitler, who moved to the United States and enlisted in the U.S. Navy. He actively fought for the Allies against his own uncle's regime. He even wrote a magazine article about it with the very subtle title, Why I Hate My Uncle. You just can't make this stuff up.
All right, Section 4, the end and the aftermath. So after years and years of just unimaginable fighting and bloodshed, the war finally started to wind down. But its ending would be just as violent and world-changing as its beginning, and it would set the stage for the next 50 years of global history.
In Europe, the end came really fast. With Allied troops literally closing in on his bunker in Berlin, Hitler killed himself on April 30th. Just 1 week later, what was left of Germany formally surrendered. And the very next day was declared Victory in Europe Day. You saw these massive celebrations and parties in the streets all across the continent. The 6-year nightmare in Europe was over.
But the war in the Pacific was still raging. And in its final, terrible days, we get one of the most incredible survival stories you will ever hear. A Japanese engineer named Tsutomu Yamaguchi happened to be in Hiroshima on a business trip when the first atomic bomb was dropped, and he survived. Injured, he managed to get on a train and go home, to his hometown of Nagasaki. He arrived just in time for the second atomic bomb to be dropped, and he survived that one too.
The complete and utter devastation from those 2 atomic bombs, plus the Soviet Union finally declaring war on Japan, it left Japan's leaders with no choice. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced it was surrendering. And with that, World War II was officially and finally over.
So, what did the world even look like after all the smoke had cleared? Well, it was totally different. The old European empires that had run the world for centuries were just shattered. Their cities and economies were in ruins. And rising from the ashes were 2 brand new rival superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. And their clash of ideologies would define the entire next chapter of history in what we call the Cold War.
And that brings us to our final section, the true cost of victory. Because as we wrap this up, we have to come back to this. We've talked about politics and crazy stories, but the real price of this war, it was paid in human lives.
And this chart, it says it all. The military losses were staggering. 17 million soldiers for the Allies, 8 million for the Axis. But even those numbers are completely dwarfed by the number of civilians killed. Around 45 million civilians, non-soldiers, lost their lives. That number alone includes 21 million citizens just from the Soviet Union. The scale of the loss is it's breathtaking. Which leaves us with this one last unavoidable question. The history books will tell you the Allied powers won the war, and that's true. But when you really look at the sheer scale of the devastation, when you try to absorb the loss of over 70 million people, you have to ask yourself, in a war like this, does anyone really win? Or is humanity itself the only real loser?